Well, Caroline Di Russo, one of my favourite people in Australian politics. Welcome to the Knack on Australia podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast. We're usually lunch or dinner buddies, so this is really different for us.
We have. I'm usually paying, as I joke. Western Australia is not as nice as the rest of the country, but somehow I end up paying when we meet. There you go. There's much change on the political right globally. New parties are being set up and transformed across the Western world. And some online commentators and personalities in Australia have thought to themselves, hey, maybe I should set up a new political party too. You're president of the Western Australian division of the Liberal Party of Australia.
Yep.
For those who are unaware, what is involved in running a major political party in Australia today?
It's a much bigger job, I think, than even when you take it on that you expect
Yep.
right at the beginning. And of course, like with all political parties, one of the majors, or when you're running one of the major parties, it's usually state and federal campaigns, and it's usually, every single lower house seat in state and federal. So in WA, that's 59 at a state level, 16 at a federal level, and then obviously Senate and upper house. So first of all, it's having a footprint that covers your entire geographical area. But it's also a big membership organisation, and it's lots of social events, and it's fundraising, and it's your parliamentary teams and what they're doing both here and over in Canberra, your community engagement, your member engagement, and when you're the president, it's kind of, in some ways it's managing all of those things, and in some ways it's trying not to interfere in any of them, if that makes sense. So you're there to help facilitate a lot of the action, a lot of what goes on. But the parliamentary teams do their thing, and within the membership and the grassroots, we really encourage them, to be active and to engage. So it's broadly a facilitation role of those three parts of the party.
Yeah. I know this, but I know a lot of people do not. It's when you run an election campaign at a state and federal level, what's your role? You're not, how much are you involved in the day-to-day of that?
Well, in one sense, you're hugely involved, and in another sense, it's you're really in the back, right? Like
Mm.
it's not a public-facing role so much for the party president. It's your parliamentary leader and it's your candidate. So a big part of my role in getting ready for a campaign, and this goes back probably about 18 months or so before, is going, okay, well, which are our target seats? Which seats are we pre-selecting first? I have a state director who's like a CEO essentially. They actually run the pre-selections and that sort of thing, but it's the role of the president to guide through those approval bodies. Well, which seats like I said, are we going to do our incumbents first? How are those order of pre-selections going to be done? Lower house, upper house. So it starts right back there. The fundraising part also starts right back there, because you can have great candidates, you can have a great parliamentary team, but ultimately campaigns cost money. So a big part of it is fundraising. And then there's the pastoral care side of it, I suppose, and that's, keeping checked in with your candidates to see how they're going, particularly those ones that you pre-select 12 months out. The campaign road can be long and tough, and so checking in with them. I like to go door knocking. I think that is one. It's a great way to catch up with your candidates, and see them in action and be able to support them in action. But it's also a really good way to get to see different parts of your city or geographical area or whatever, to be able to see what voters and what the electorate are saying on the ground, because obviously our leaders can't get everywhere all the time, leaders, parliamentary team, and it's nice to be able to feed bits of information back to the CEO and to the parliamentary team about what you're hearing on the ground.
Yeah. So there's a huge amount of work in a legacy party, a lot of it behind the scenes, a huge amount of people skills, a lot of making sure the place is funded and rocking along. And so there's a challenge to establish a new party, because I think most people don't even know what is truly involved in that. But that's not to say existing parties will endure forever, right? You sort of have to prove yourself at each election. And the Liberal Party does have problems. In the last federal election, that played out. It now struggles to win seats within 20K of any capital city in Australia. Why is that, and what can be done about it?
Well, all political parties, and a great example of this, even before we get to dealing with the Libs here in Australia, is the Tories. They're the oldest political party on the planet, and they are struggling, I suppose, with their identity crisis at the moment. So that there is a really good example of, yes, you can be around a long time, but you have to remain relevant and engaged. So, like, obviously, we look to what we need to do here in the party, but also it's always really interesting to look to what other parties are doing overseas. And here in the Libs, I think you know the thing that people always need to understand in politics is things aren't necessarily just natural. Like, it's not like it'll naturally swing one way, it'll naturally swing another way. You've got to do the work and make the effort and develop the policies and all of those sorts of things. And what was, I suppose, interesting for me to see at a federal level was how 2022 and 2025, in that federal sphere, it's not exactly the same, but it rhymed a little bit with Western Australia 2017 and 2021. And the thing that we did learn in the West Australian context within that time is, obviously, the more reduced your parliamentary team is, the less resources you have, the harder it is to fundraise, the more non-incumbent candidates you are, and the more pressure there is on everyone who's remaining there to be able to put their best foot forward to the next election. So while our state result this year is probably not as great as we all would have hoped, when you've got two members in the lower house, that's an awful lot to come back from. And I don't think anyone in politics should ever think, oh, well, this is the worst it can get. If you don't do the work, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a swing one way or the other. So I think the most important thing for the moment, and this sounds a little bit cliched, but it's actually really the truth, mate, is, well, you've got to go and do the exercise of speaking to people who are outside of the party and who are in the electorate, and particularly those who may have voted for you in the past, and you may have lost them more recently. This whole idea of having rusted-on voters who vote one way their entire life, as we're seeing with reduced primary votes for the Libs as well as Labor, that there is not the case going forward necessarily. So you can't just take your base for granted. So go and have those conversations. Go and speak to the people who voted for you, and understand why they voted for you. And perhaps those people who haven't voted for you, have a look there as well. Because ultimately, if you want to win back seats, you have to win back people who either have not voted for you before or who have previously voted for you, and it needs to come back. And I think we're increasingly seeing, in the sense of the metro, the urban fringe, the regional, an increasing sort of divide in priorities and in the way that people live and those sorts of things. So there is always going to be things that differ, and always going to be, policy areas or whatever that are at odds. But if you put those three groups together, there is going to be a point in the Venn diagram that there are issues or there are policies that are going to cross across everyone. So I always think it's really important to look after, and again, don't like this word, super cliched, but so the truth, you've got to look after your bread and butter.
Yeah. We were successful at the state level in Queensland. The LNP took back government, but we still didn't win any new seats within 20K of the Brisbane CBD. And obviously, the federal election, we also lost there's a whole stack of federal seats that were lost here, which the Liberal Party would have expected to hold on to. You're originally from regional WA and now live in Perth. I'm originally from regional Queensland and now live in probably the greenest part of Australia, politically speaking.
Well, you now I have the only lower house green seat. Can you just stop a second? Sorry. Sorry, I've got a dog that
Yeah, I have a Green councillor, a Green state member, a Green federal member, and Larissa Waters, the leader of the Green Party, lives within the stone's throw of here. And Jeanette Young's up the road as well. So yeah, so but wasn't like that 7 years ago, right? It has completely changed. And in my original hometown of Townsville, the stadium when they host the Cowboys, they literally have a slogan that goes over the loudspeaker: "We're kicking goals and digging coal." And when I was up there, I was thinking, how would that play at the MCG or what is it, Optus Stadium in Perth? Would you? And the crowd cheers there, but I don't think they'd cheer in inner city Perth or Melbourne. So how do you bridge that divide, or is it just impossible to?
Well, I think we often talk about the what, and I think it's talking
Mm,
about the how, and it is very difficult, right? And there is no
mm,
one answer, but I think for parties like the Libs, it's talking about the importance of regional development and how much that adds uh, to either our state or federal coffers, and how much that means for the things that we get to enjoy here in the city. Obviously, the West Australian Pilbara creates a huge amount of West Australian and wealth for the entire country. But most people have never been there. Most people have never been there. And I remember when there was a conversation started under the last term about nature positive, and there was and I can't remember the exact fact, but it was like the proposal document suggested that not to scare the animals or something like that, you shouldn't drive more than 70 kilometres an hour in the Pilbara. Like, can you imagine doing 1,200 kilometres at 70 clicks? Like, it is just ludicrous. So I think part of it is a big education piece about how big our country really is
mm.
outside of the metro area, how much the metro area benefits from the business and the risks that are taken and all of those sorts of things out in the regions. And then also having the conversation around, you know, having the conversation around energy policy and talking about, you know, like, what do we actually need to be able to have a first world economy? What do we actually have to have first world living standards? And
Mm.
just bringing it back to those sorts of basics about how things like that actually affect your everyday electricity bill. And I feel like sometimes, you know, there's a very squiggly line between A and B, and maybe if we just had more pointed and direct conversations, but there's always going to be groups in the city or people who aren't struggling to make ends meet, who have the luxury of having views that places in regional Australia don't have that luxury, because there may only be the one coal mine that is the big employer for that particular town. That might be the main industry. It's not like you can just go and work in finance, maybe in downtown Cairns or somewhere else. You don't have that diversity of industry
Yeah,
necessarily.
tell the life export guys to learn to code, and you probably get biffed in the nose, right? I mean, it's just
Correct,
ridiculous.
right? Correct.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's that sort of thing. I think we need to get better at having with adult conversations.
yeah. So, I mean, it's a little bit over discussed, this issue, but I'll put it to you anyway. A new poll came out which shows catastrophic low levels support for the Liberal Party among women under 50. You're Italian heritage. They're supposedly great at seducing women. What would you say to those on the centre right? Um, how can we woo the ladies, and would better looking male candidates help?
And look, the thing is, what the
I don't mean to be
Italians
flip-
think
I don't
right
mean to be
way of
flippant. I'm just
seducing women will probably get you done for sexual harassment in this country. Anyway, so that's a whole nother issue. I
yeah.
think we should be very, very careful there. Look, again, I
Mm.
think I think there's a number of things here. I think part of it is a policy conversation. Um, and as a substantive, and again, it's how we have those conversations. And historically, well, if you look way back. And I'm always loath to do the legacy sort of stuff because we need to talk about where we're going, not where we've been. But, up until and during the Howard era, and the Liberal Party actually did a great job at meeting women in the electorate where they were. Now, women in the electorate have moved a little bit, and we need to move with them in the way or meet them where they are in having those conversations. I'm not suggesting in any way that we all become raging progressives or anything like that at all. But you got to be able to understand your audience in order to be able to create the policies and frame the narratives that are going to be relevant and engaging to that demographic. And it's women, it's young people, and I think we have to prove the way that we do that. Do I think that it's dire? No. Do I think there's a lot of work to do? Yes. And I think we have to just be open-minded about what that looks like, because I think those people and those women, they want to see a political party in which they see themselves. They want to see a vision for the future, and I'm not being all kumbaya about that. But ultimately, when people go into the ballot box, they vote for where they think that their needs and values sit.
Yeah. Do female candidates help? Because in the last, you can't, if you're online, and I know you are, it strikes me that there's this Sydney Sweeney ad, right, going around. Now, she is university educated, attractive,
Yep.
looks great in jeans,
Yes.
but the vitriol directed at her by women is out of control, right? So do women like only particular types of women? Is it women candidates for women candidates' sake? Doesn't seem an automatic kind of like match, right? Because otherwise they'd all be going, "You go Sweeney."
Yeah, well, and I saw that ad and I thought she looked smoking hot, and all power to you, love. Doesn't matter how community educated you are, every single woman wants to look good in a pair of jeans. Look, I think we need to be not be careful in that conversation. I think we can sometimes over-egg that conversation. So yes, Labor have had quotas and they've now got more women in, but the question is the electorate getting a better result? And no one ever really has conversation. And yes, look, I know when we were still in federal government, and that whole policy around endometriosis, that all actually started under the Morrison government. That there was something that was championed by Nicole Flint, who has suffered shockingly from endometriosis. We did a lot of the work. I actually just don't think maybe we championed what we'd achieved enough. And I think sometimes it's a matter of and I feel like the coalition doesn't do this as well as Labor. Labor really celebrate, let's call it their successes or their perceived successes or whatever. There's, varying ways that you can count.
There's
But I don't think
a mythology with Labor. This this story that they sell, and it's like, the vanguard prevailed, and we all the heroes of the revolution marched on, and let's again recall, Gough walking on the Great Wall of China and reenact this sort of weird kind of boomer nostalgic way. I mean, it does my head in, but I mean, they do that in a way that we don't
they
really
do that very well. And I feel like that, we have had our successes. And, when you're talking about women firsts, most of them have originated in the Libs and in the coalition. We just don't do well enough, I think, at celebrating that or making sure that people know that. So I think part of it is that legacy piece. Part of it is, I think, even our modern successes, we probably haven't sold as much as we can. And then the third part is there is still this ongoing conversation about it. And a lot of the time, the conversation happens without us in it. And that's why I think it's really important for women in the party, and particularly senior women in the party, to be public in their views on these sorts of things, because
Mm,
you get to choose to be part of the conversation or not. It will happen without you. And if you are not in it, then it's going to be a distortion of the position, because, as they say, history is written by the victors, so to speak. Other people are going to write your history for you. And I don't think that we should allow that necessarily to happen. So I think that there is a number of things. Do I want to see more women in parliament? Yes. And when you're talking about federal parliament, like WA is a little bit
mm,
different.
mm.
Everywhere else, all the other major capital cities in Australia are about an hour from Canberra. We're 3.5 hours from Canberra, plus a 2 or 3 hour time zone. And if you look at someone like Rick Wilson, or you look at someone like Melissa Price, who's coming from Geraldton or who's coming from Narrogin into Perth and then over to Canberra, I mean, even just the travel involved in that is huge. You don't just get to pop in, to Sydney on a 1 hour flight that leaves every hour for whatever of the evening and then get back to Canberra. It's a whole day of travelling. So I know it's hard on our male MPs with young families. It's hard for Hasty. It was hard for Ben Morton. So equally, it's something that, as a general rule, tends to be a little bit of a deterrent for women and more broadly those with younger families, just because of the nature of that disconnection. And going into this last lot of campaigns or pre-selections, a lot of women opted to run at a state level rather than federal because they got to go home at night. So we actually
Yeah,
had,
we
good numbers of
in
women in our marginal state seats.
it's a factor in Brisbane City Council, which is held by the nationally aligned Liberal Party. We have a majority number of women there
Yeah,
as councillors, because it's more convenient to their lives to do that way.
totally.
Um, and and I mean, the distances are crazy in WA. They're crazy for all Australian politicians. I mean, I'm from North Queensland. Yeah, we go 3 hours south to get anywhere near Canberra. And you listen to those UK politicians, and they bemoan, I'm living 4 hours outside of Westminster. It's such a pain. And people would kill for that, right? Out here. Just
Yeah.
changing tack a little bit, Caroline. How should politicians on the political right deal with the new media? If some people think some people do it very well. I mean, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, he's certainly used Twitter, to now X, to his advantage. Um,
Yep.
you've increasingly seen people in the UK like Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick and others do it quite well. But in Australia, with few exceptions, perhaps like yourself and others, those on the centre right either, I feel, tend to use the media, like the social media and other things, as either a distribution mechanism for press releases,
Mm.
or else they feel like they have to do some cringe-inducing dance on TikTok. So how should the right use new media?
Well, I found some of the TikTok videos from the first week of Parliament a little confronting
Oh
for
yes.
my like, just as a general rule, like, that's a really serious role. And yes, I understand you want to engage with younger people and all of that sort of thing, but you know, just a bit of appreciation for the office, I think, is in order.
Mm,
I think it depends on the person and how comfortable they are with media. And I think there is increasingly a view that politicians, well, should do more media, particularly even just being trained in doing media and getting comfortable with doing media, but also getting comfortable in doing what we might call kind of the more unfriendly sort of media. Like, sometimes it's good to lather yourself in blood and throw yourself in with the piranhas. It's an incredibly good character building exercise, and then you survive a few of those, and all of a sudden you're bulletproof, right? I mean,
mm.
look, as you would know, Twitter is the platform of my choice, and I started on Twitter when it was still like 140 character, and it's evolved, it's changed, it's really really different, and I think your platform depends on the sort of person you are and how you like to convey your message. Some people are better with pictures, some people are better with video, some people are better with words. So I think it's about finding what you're comfortable with and ultimately what you think that you're most effective with. So I would encourage our politicians to do more media and use more media, but also to not be afraid to step into those media outlets which may not necessarily be considered as friendly, because I think developing relationships within the media, even across the broad spectrum, I think is really important. And for me personally, I read everything from the Guardian all the way through to the Fin Review and the Australian. I read the Age. I like to read a whole heap of different outlets simply because sometimes if you only read one outlet and for my sins I'll nominate the Age, you get a very particular view of the world. And sometimes for us on the right, it can be really hard to understand why do certain cohorts of people think in a certain way. Well, it's actually really important to read and understand the media that they consume. And the Age is just an example. And I don't want to heap on the Age, but just from the point of view that if you only read the Age, you probably think the most important thing is stories about private schools and the like. But it helps us to understand where the varying voter cohorts are at. And one
Yeah,
of my
yeah,
one of my favourite pastimes is reading the comments section in things like the Age. I find that
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, right, yeah. No, I found, well, with Trump's initial campaign in 2016, he was engaging on Twitter. Yes, he was posting. It wasn't actually like TikTok funny dances. It was actually either attacking or explaining policy or engaging with an issue, albeit in
Yeah,
his inimitable style. But it was a great source of information. So he was
sure.
like laying out issues and getting watching people argue about stuff. And I think the way that the kind of Jeb exclamation mark guys, when they're reading the paper, were doing their set piece stuff was simply not getting. And I still think there's a divide on the right. Not so much people will read I don't know, like a Philip Adams in The Australian, or
Mm.
even if they're already subscribing to one paper, they'll get the left side of things. But
Yeah,
unless they're actually on social media, it's like you communicate. I increasingly find this. If you're chatting with people who are just reading the mainstream press compared to those
yes.
that are on X and others, it really is um, bigger than the rural metropolitan divide in some ways.
Sure, and I think I largely agree with that. And you think about the political landscape in 2016 and leading up to Trump's first election. I mean, the mainstream media was a real close shop. And the tactic that I suppose Trump took was, well, look, I don't feel like I can get fair hearing out of either of these guys. I'm just going to go over the top of them and go straight to the people. So that there was really novel at the time that happened, because that is not something that we'd seen in any major way, any major political campaign before. And you're starting to see a bit more of that going on in various different parts of the world. And obviously, it's not just the Anglosphere, but in other political systems as
Yeah.
well. It's very, very interesting to watch. But it's really it's been very interesting the way it has, in a sense, diminished the authority of the mainstream news.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, and also it's for revealing these
Yes.
supposed impartial,
Mm,
reporters. You see their views, and the curtain is pulled away, and it's not anywhere near as impressive in many cases as
mm.
what you might have been led to believe in the past. You're in WA, and Twiggy Forrest, who's the executive director and founder of one of the biggest iron ore companies in the world, on which Australia's fortunes all rely, had an article in The Australian a few days ago entitled "In the National Interest, China Must Be a Key Climate Ally," in which he claimed, amongst other things, that the propagation of oil and gas is hurting every person on this planet. So let's just park that. It's a debatable proposition, right? I understand why Twiggy talks up China. It's our biggest customer. The customer is always right. in theory, right? And without casting any aspersions on him, how do we ensure that the interests of the iron ore magnates in WA align with the national interest? How do you deal with them? You must have had some exposure to them during your time there as Liberal Party president.
Well, I don't think it's just them. I think it's
Mm.
more broadly, there are people who would say the same things about the banks. They'd say the same things about the unions. They'd say the same things about the super funds. I think that yes, obviously they're huge companies. They contribute a great deal to our national prosperity. They employ lots of people. That happens in various industries across the board. I think, and I have a business background, right? A law background, not necessarily have grown up in politics. And I think it always comes back to, well, is the taxpayer getting value here? And it's a whole heap of different slices there, right? Are we making it easy enough to be able to do business in this country? Are we making it so that it is worth taking the risk to set up a new project? Can you get through the approvals processes, reasonably well? Yes. Is there good regulation there so that we protect our environment and we protect, you know, our people and all those sorts of things? And I think most fair-minded people know that there needs to be some regulation, so that there are some guardrails on business. I don't think that there is anything ever remotely controversial. But you need to be able to set up a landscape that encourages investment and it encourages risk. Um,
Mm.
Obviously, companies need to be able to make a profit, but those companies should also be paying tax, and those companies should also be employing people fairly, and those companies also, like they get a pretty good deal on a great number of things. There is still that social contract that, well, there's all these other Australians that are here. If you're getting the benefit of a natural resource that obviously vests in the state. Um, Offshore, or anyway, we're not going to get into high court judgments there, but there still needs to be that value proposition back to the taxpayer. And I think every government and depending on your ideological bent, you're probably going to skew a little bit one way or the other. But I think, as a general rule, I think the Australian public are pretty good at working out where the middle line is and what's fair. And I think it needs to be broadly fair for everyone.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I guess what I'm getting at is it's almost like those movie stars where, Leo, you're a great actor, but then suddenly you've got to
Mm.
people pay attention
Give
to
you
you on other
private
issues.
jet and whatnot, and you're like,
That's
just
right. Twiggy, you're a great miner.
mm,
Go for it. But people are influenced by his pronouncements on other areas in which he may not necessarily be the world's expert. And it's hard to. I imagine it's hard to balance that. It's hard to balance with
sure.
across the
Sure.
whole
And
scheme
I
of things.
think
Just
people know that there's a personal view, there's
mm,
probably commercial imperative, there's a like,
yeah,
I don't
all
think
the things. Yeah,
anyone in business, in iron ore, in banking, is coming
mm,
from any of these positions as a martyr.
mm. Without a doubt. Hey, you follow the UK a bit because you're host of the Royal Report. And
Yeah,
in Sunday evenings. Was it 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or whatever? Maybe later. 10 o'clock, I
10
think,
p.m.
later. Um, so, um, and it strikes me that there's some very interesting, innovative thinkers in the UK of late, even though the country is falling to bits. Um, how does Australia become more influential in the world of ideas? Because it strikes, and this is the example I often use, Rory Stewart from
Yes.
That's All Politics. He comes out here and gives a lecture in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. Now, personal opinion, think second rate, boring, the rest of it. Why isn't Caroline Di Russo giving lectures telling the Poms what she thinks of the world in Leeds, Manchester, and Birmingham?
Oh,
You know what I mean? I mean,
dear. Not that dire just yet, mate. Look, I think again we go back to this idea of vision. And I was over in Canberra last week. Ben Small, member
mm,
for Forest, gave his uh, technically an inaugural speech, but his inaugural speech to the House.
mm,
And he made this really good point about we need to stop we've become this country that can't. Everything's can't. It's always a reason why we can't do things, or why it's a problem, or why it's too hard. And you've got to think, I mean, obviously, Indigenous Australians have been here a very long time. But when you look at a city like Sydney or Melbourne or Canberra, you look at our institutions, you look at our infrastructure,
Mm.
that there in time is very recent. And that there is from a country that decided it could do things and it wanted to
Mm.
do things and it took risks. And a lot of them paid off. Some of them did. I mean, history is always littered
Mm.
with great ideas that went bust. That's okay. But I feel like we've become the country of can't, or we don't want to take
Mm.
risks, or if
Mm.
someone fails, and this is where the US is different. If someone fails at something, we consider them a failure. In the
Mm.
US, it's like, well, they stuffed up this time, but we'll give them another go, and they've learned from experience and they'll do better next time. That we have this different attitude to success and this different
Mm.
attitude to, and I want a bit more of the encouragement of success and the
Mm.
encouragement of innovation and being able to do things. And I think if we're a bit more open-minded in that sense, um, I think we can end up being a country again. I'm not to say that we're totally, but I've definitely felt this
Mm.
dampening of
100%.
national energy for innovation.
Yeah, and I increasingly find, I mean, when people are down in Australia and I say to them, "Look, well done identifying the problems.
Mm.
Let's talk about the solutions more," because people tend to, like, harp on about the negatives, and it's you gotta identify problems, granted, but, you know, I'm all ears for how to turn this ship around.
Sure.
On that point, I guess, on a related note, do you think the Howard era, types understand the policy change that has occurred in the United States and elsewhere? And I'm thinking, for example, on trade. I mean, open borders trade used to be this thing that the Hawke Keating Howard era, endlessly parroted. But we are about to lose our metal manufacturing industry in Australia. And part of the problem with that is no doubt net zero, without a doubt. But part of the issue is that it's just cheaper to move all the stuff offshore and then import it duty free back in. Um,
Mm.
and I feel like the guys from that era, which promoted a certain liberalization, which was necessary at the time, they haven't adjusted and worked out that as long as you allow 100% manufactured goods to come in from China duty free, you'll never have an industrial sector of any significance. We're 5% at the moment. If we lose the metal manufacturing industry down to 3, that's sub-Saharan levels of industry here in Australia. That's not what was promised, right?
No, and there's I did write about this. Oh God, I'm not sure if it was early this year or late last year, and it's the economic complexity index, that we
Mm.
are becoming a less complex, which is a bad thing. We want to be complex. We want to be able to do more than one process. And yes, we got
It's
an
sophisticated.
totally. It's sophistication rather than complexity. But I think the word that they use is complexity, which I'm
Yeah, yeah,
not sure is necessarily the
yeah.
right one, but that's the word that is used. And and we have slid back substantially. I think, like with anything, there can be too much of a good thing, and good things aren't without consequences. So, look,
Mm.
I think as a general rule, yes, I'm a free trade person, right? I grew up on a broadacre farm. We our biggest production was wheat. And that's
Mm.
sold on an international market. Most of that, particularly out of Western Australia, is exported, like
Mm.
sheep,
Mm.
exported. So
Mm.
I'm very conscious of those sorts of things, because that's actually what kept us going for a very
Mm.
long time.
Mm.
But I think we are now starting to see some of the adverse consequences of that, which I'm not sure I don't know if they weren't anticipated, or people didn't think they were gonna be as bad, or what. I'm not quite sure,
Mm.
on the thinking of the at the time, but we still need to be able to look after ourselves, and I think self-reliance and self-dependence, when you look at a party that, I'm a member of a party that, lauds the individual and personal responsibility and all those sorts of things. If too much of your manufacturing or whatever goes overseas, you stop being able to look after yourself. And we saw bits of that happen over COVID, which
Mm.
was a pandemic, but was not a period of regional insecurity or war or anything like that. So I'm not quite sure that our mindset has, and I'm not suggesting that we become total protectionists or isolationists or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I just think you can tweak at the edges just to manage some of that risk better.
Yeah, we used to be. I think you've posted from time to time sort of pictures of old Australia, dudes with their shirts off chopping wood or God knows what, not to their own. But there was a much more of a resourcefulness and a
Yes.
practicality in Australia, and I think part of the reason for that was you couldn't just order it, via Amazon or Temu or
Really.
whatever from China. You had to sort of be at some level a bit more capable of doing it or manufacturing it and taking care of it yourself. So, yeah, I think there's cultural kind of being a cultural impact, but how you unwind that, I mean,
Who
what is it?
knows? But there
Good,
was
good.
even, and I remember this being in the
Yeah,
news.
man, what else?
Sorry,
What's
I
that?
remember this being in the news not that long ago, but a Canadian university was offering like an adulting 101 course.
Oh god, yeah.
And I think to myself, if you don't know how to turn on the oven, you don't know how to use a washing machine, you don't know how to change it, like just really basic things. To what extent have we delegated out too much of our lives for inconvenience? And I think that there is a bit of a cultural question that we probably should be asking ourselves, and that's before you get to industry and business and professional and whatever. There has been that culture of delegating out as much as possible.
Trust the universities to come up with a course called adulting. I mean, I can't stand that term, but I'm sure they're making nice money selling to people, so I guess that's entrepreneurialism at some particular
We used
level.
to call it home
Hey,
economics.
oh, yeah, no, I remember that well and did not do as well as I imagine you may have done, Caroline, in that particular subject. In fact,
I
I
was well
remember
trained. What can I say?
apple crumble, which crumbled, dramatically in many different directions. Hey, change tack a little bit more. There was a meme, whatever, at least a year ago, which highlighted that men like to think about the Roman Empire and Republic, probably a lot more than women might imagine. But I think that you probably can hold your own slightly in that area, right? Do you think there's a lot of sort of late stage Republic talk from people like JD Vance and others in the online right? We need a new Caesar, or it's this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Do you think it's conceivable that as there'll be a royal report which covers the coronation of a modern day Augustus Caesar in due course?
Look, I don't see it happening in my lifetime. I'm trying to pitch out what that would look like, and the narrative and the commentary and the questions and who would you
It'd
have
be a
on that
great
panel?
show.
Right. There is a lot of talk about, the late empire kind of priorities or lack of priorities, and it doesn't always receive a great rap. But I think Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is always a good read. Human frailty has this wonderful ability to last millennia. Sometimes we learn the lessons, sometimes we don't, or sometimes we learn them for a little while. But it's, that conversation that, freedom is only a generation away, right? Like you have to keep enforcing those sorts of rights in order to maintain them. Um, and we do start to see pieces of things that are happening that you're like, how can this be a priority? There's all these major issues going on in the world, and here we are stuffing around at some kind of really ancillary, off to the left or the right, whichever, and I don't mean that in a political sense, but just way off centre stage. And that always does take me back to Edward Gibbon's. Look, I'm not in any sense or in any way advocating for dictatorship or anything of that sort.
Neither am I. Neither
Um,
am I, by the way. Neither am I. I'm
you know,
just thinking it'd be a
can
great.
be really, really clear about this,
Yeah. Yeah.
but only that good societies need to be maintained. And I think
Mm.
that there is always the thing that is learning, particularly from that or for other readings at the time, is that yes, we all have rights. We all also have responsibilities, and maintaining a good and fair and safe society and our freedoms requires all of us to have that little bit of vigilance and care every day that extends beyond our own person.
Yeah, I mean, the character of Rome, Republican Rome, changed, right? People in the big capital started paying a lot of attention to what they were eating and their fish and their ponds, and they lost that old, you know, yeoman, soldier, farmer spirit, and they imported a lot of their goods from overseas when once they sort of relied on their own people to make it themselves. Yeah, I mean, like, just to push the point a little bit, is that, you grew up on a wheat farm, yeoman farmer, and now you're into luxury handbags and the like? Is that is that is that narrative arc going on here too?
Am I part of the problem? Is that what you're asking
Well,
me? Well, I think that's a
but
little bit rough.
illustrative of wider historical forces at play. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, to be clear, I can still do all the hands-on stuff. So, that generation hasn't quite passed yet. But again, like we were talking about way earlier, I think it's part of that educational piece of understanding where we come from, where our food comes from, the importance of our family and our family structures. Dependence on the state is a terrible thing for the family unit.
Mm. Yeah, it is, yeah.
And some people aren't going to like me saying that, but the people closest to you, where that is absolutely possible, should be your family. So, look, there are certain things, and that's an example of it. The disconnection between rural and metro Australia, particularly in WA. Everyone had, back in the day, everyone had cousins who lived in the country. Everyone
That
went
is
to
true.
country
Yeah.
for school holidays and that sort of thing. A lot that happens a lot less now than what it did in the past. So
Yeah.
then there is but a small part, but you add up all those small parts together, and that's you end up with things. Disconnection. You end up with things like loneliness. You end up, with all sorts of other issues which are not of themselves having one single cause. But the less people you have around you, the less socializing, the less care, the less human contact or whatever. Well, of course you get lonely. Of course that might affect your mental health. There is nothing
Mm.
unusual about that. And I'm sure there's some people who might be watching this who thinking, well, look, sometimes my own family can be a bit of a strain on my mental. And look, I understand too. I grew up in an Italian family and they can be a lot of work, right? But I
Mm.
still wouldn't swap them for anything. But I think there are certain things, and a little bit has got to do with the amount that we're on these things, our phones and whatever. And I think it all adds a little bit to that. I don't want to use the word disintegration of society,
Mm.
but perhaps, that less connection and that less strength.
Yeah. Again, changing gears a bit. WA is, from a budgetary perspective, doing very, very well, and you've got a sweet deal on the GST.
A fair
So,
deal. We have a fair deal
what,
on the GST.
and I take your point about places like Victoria and others that have resources that they should be exploiting, and
Yeah.
don't. What do you say to a poor Sicilian Australian guy called David Crisafulli, who grew up in regional Australia? Why should the Australian Sicilians in WA get a better deal than poor, their poor counterparts over here?
Oh, look, we've got an awful lot in common in that sense, David and I. I mean, look, ultimately, yes, WA has a lot of resources, and there have been periods of time where WA hasn't been as well off, as it is at the moment. But equally, you know, these things don't necessarily last forever. And this here takes us back to the conversation we had earlier of, well, we still need to encourage investment in WA. We still need to have people wanting to develop projects in Western Australia. We need to be talking about future pipeline and future prosperity. You can't just sit on your tushy and think, oh, well, it's great now, it's going to be fabulous forever, because that is not how it works. So, things are reasonable for the moment, but also it's not dumb luck in Western Australia. And this is a little bit of what annoys me, is everyone just thinks, oh, it just all magically happened and no one had to try really hard, and we just dug up all this dirt, sent it off on a ship, and we all became bazillionaires. Like, that's just not how it was, and particularly for a long time in developing industry like the iron ore industry, just because it all looks good now. And it's always one of those things, broadly, and this is not in relation to WA, but just broadly, people always look at what you have. No one ever looks at what you had to do to get there. And this is why the Victorians really grind my gears, because they have got resources, but they have chosen not to develop them. So why should poor state government policy at a state level, why should we have to fill the gap from WA when we're still only getting 75 cents in the dollar? We're still getting less than what is the actual aggregate amount. Why should we be filling the gap on poor government policy?
Yeah, no, nice deflection into a mutual common enemy in those Sicilian
Victoria.
Victorians. Yep, they just. Yeah, I remember a long time ago when I was in Washington D.C. I met some nice couple who'd come in to look at the Lincoln Memorial and everything else, and I was walking up there with them, and they always wanted to pay, and they said, and did your states fight each other like ours did? And I was like, but maybe, Victoria and Queensland had been closer. Maybe something would have happened in due course. Who knows? Hey, Caroline, final question. What next for you? You're president of the Libs. I think it's the final term now. After that, do you, I don't know, retire on a beach in Sicily? Do you focus on other things? Do you run? What do you do?
Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me. So I've nominated to do, so we can do 4 one term. So nominations, of course. Okay. I do have a challenger, and there will be a vote on the at our state conference the last weekend of August. So look, so far I have been well supported in this role, but like with anything, you make your calls and you take the feedback and whatever, and particularly after 2 election losses, there's always feedback, and you do have to take that and put that into the wall. How do we do this all better next time? So you never take for granted something like the state presidency, even though it's a voluntary position and it's a huge amount of work. It is still also
people don't understand that. Yeah.
No, it's still a huge privilege. You get to work with a lot of really wonderful people and obviously engage into the community. So, 31st of August will be that vote. So, assuming that I am successful, that will be another 12 months up until whenever our next state conference is in the back end of next year. I haven't really got that far after Stoke. I'm going to have a couple of weeks in Italy after conference. I've really wanted our MPs and our HQ staff to have their holidays first. Sure. They've obviously worked incredibly hard having 2 elections. And who knows? That might be the decision, Dan. That might be when I decide, after this presidency thing, I'm just going to come and sun myself. To be honest, yep. I don't 100% know what's next. I still have my business, as you well know, and I do like the flexibility of having a few balls in the air. So I'm still writing. I'm still doing a bit of telly. We'll see. I'm open-minded about it. You never know when an opportunity.
It's the way to be. You're a breath of. I always found you a breath of fresh air, and sometimes parts of the Liberal or centre right in Australia, which can get a bit stuck in their ways. So thanks for making time, and look forward to keeping in touch going forward.
Oh, always a pleasure, and I look forward to you paying for lunch next time you're in WA.
I think you're right. No, no, I'll be accused by no. I know how I paid not because I know how much the presidency costs to cruise around
I'm
the restaurant. I'm
teasing
not
you.
being apologetic for that. And I
I'm
yeah, whatever.
teasing you,
And
mate.
it's fully disclosed to the public at last. There you go. Take it easy,
Lovely to
Caroline.
speak to
I'll
you as always, mate.
see you, mate. Bye.